the Evolution Security Podcast. Well, it is that time again. You have turned your dial to the Evolution Security Radio Show. And I've got my co-host, my right-hand man, Eric Davis. How you doing, brother?
Man, doing great. I'm not going to lie. It has been a rough week at the day job. And, you know, there's days that we all have like that. And, man, I'm just glad to be hanging out with you guys, you know, getting a little bit of downtime.
Bro, are you gonna take that insult?
And which one was that? Maybe are you talking about your right-hand man? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Well,
I just blew it off.
You must have really had a bad day then. Well, in all seriousness, this is the Evolution Security Podcast. We are excited to have Mr. Adam Scholl on from Scholl Security Group. Talking with you, Adam, pre-show, man, I'm excited about this interview. You've got some info and experience to share with our audience. We're excited to have you here, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I know we've talked about doing this for a while, and I'm glad all of our schedules finally lined up and we're able to make it happen. So thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know, Adam, it is funny sometimes. It doesn't happen that often, but we'll converse with folks about coming on the show, and then sometimes it doesn't happen, or we'll discuss it and try to put together a time to get it executed, and it typically happens. But man, I just have to extend an apology to you, man.
No apology needed, man. I was super busy too. You guys were busy. I actually forgot about it. And then, like I told you, pre-show, I'm a fan of the show. A lot of my friends and colleagues have been on the show. So I do listen to quite a few of your episodes. And I was listening to one recently. I don't recall which one it was. And I said, man, you know what? I should reach out to those guys again. So but I'm glad we're making it happen.
Well, Adam, I said to you in text, our show was built around our mentors and built around people that we learn from. And I told you on text, man, we emulate dudes like you. So it's an honor to have you as a fan of the show. Sometimes it's crazy how much support we get, and we feel like part of that's because the show does have good content and information from our guests, And
you guys have done a great job. You've really brought on some fantastic guests and some of the best and brightest minds in the combatives and firearms and tactics space. So, I'm looking forward to shaking hands with the ones that I haven't met in person at the upcoming Combative Summit. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But yeah, you guys have been killing it. So
thank you so much. And the truth be told, if we were just doing firearms, if we were just doing firearms and just doing gear and stuff like that, we'd probably have a little bit bigger audience, maybe a lot bigger audience. But frankly, we want to do what's important. We all the
hard stuff, all the mat time and the sparring rounds, and that's the stuff that's not easy. So it's funny. I'll post a video and it'll be about something that's important, and it'll get a couple of likes, and then I'll post like a picture of my Filster Enigma, fixed blade setup, and it gets like 1,000 likes. Right? It's like that's just our culture. Is people want the shortcuts, but there's no shortcuts in the combative space. You either put in the mat time or you didn't. So you can put on whatever belt you want and whatever system you want, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't mean anything unless you've truly put the time in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't mind being, not the most massive audience as long as we're doing what we believe in, So, well, with that said, thanks a lot for that support, Adam. We're so excited to have you on. So for audience members out there, you have a massive background. go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about yourself, what got you to what you're doing now, and whatever you want to talk about to lend our audience who you are.
Sure. So, chronologically, I started as a young guy professionally and working in nightclubs, so working in bars and clubs. Eventually rose to the rank of director of security at some big clubs in the city of Philadelphia. So a lot of my practical, real world experience as it pertains to the combatives kind of started there. And so did my interest in other more legitimate martial arts. As a kid, I trained in karate and all the same stuff that the generation that grew up watching Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme did. But as an early fan of the UFC, I was interested in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just didn't know where to go. And luckily I had some good mentors in the nightclub business, one of whom was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt at the time, which in like 2000 was like being a ninja. So after watching him do some incredible things, I signed up and started training originally under Steve Maxwell in Philadelphia at the time. He was he was the only jiu-jitsu guy. And, I ended up leaving there and going to the Renzo Gracie, Pennsylvania Academy, where I've been ever since for the last 24 years. And I'm a black belt under that organization, coming up on my second degree here, actually, probably at the end of this month.
Oh.
And then so professionally from there, I went on to work in law enforcement. I was a sergeant with an agency in the Philadelphia area that did fugitive warrant stuff. So investigating, locating, and apprehending fugitives. So a lot of SWAT training and tactics training. Taught firearms defensive tactics and all that good stuff for my agency. Spent some time assigned to the US Marshals and some time assigned to the FBI as a task force officer doing the same thing. And then I went to work for the Department of Defense for a while, about 6 years as a fieldcraft instructor, so training military in everything from firearms to combatives to high threat driving and a few other things. From there, I went into the private sector, worked in executive protection, surveillance, counter surveillance. Worked for some big organizations and private individuals doing that type of work for a number of years before I was recruited into the government, where I work now as a contractor, providing training in the area of combatives and firearms tactics, travel, safety, and security. Martial arts wise, I've been doing martial arts my whole life. So, like I said, I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have a black belt in Krav Maga, and then I have a black belt under the Matt Larsen Combatives Association as well.
I mean, that's awesome, man. Yeah, incredible background. And, you mentioned working in nightclubs, all your experience with inside, the government. That's just a very solid background for what we believe is important. So that's awesome, man. I'm sure that you have some excellent
I tell a lot of the people I train these days that while the nightclub stuff is probably one of the least professional or sexy things on the resume, it's actually the one that probably gave me the most relevant experience. Dealing with people verbally and physically, dealing with different kinds of people. People that one minute you're dealing with a guy who owns a hotel chain, the next minute you're dealing with a South Philly drug dealer or mob guy. And everyone in between. And working in that environment for as many years as I did, I had the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you want to look at it, of getting to try a lot of things that I was learning in the mat rooms in real life and see what worked and what didn't. So.
Yeah, and that's, you beat me to that. That was the point I was going to make. And I don't have, a large background in nightclub work. I will admit that when myself and one of our good friends growing up, he and I did a little bit of quote unquote bouncing at a club for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron, for your information, Tony, our good friend Tony.
Yeah, I remember that time.
And I tell you, it is a observance in human behavior, and a lot of it boils down to the monkey dance and ego, which those two things can really facilitate some ugly situations. And no doubt you developed your managing unknown contacts pretty well, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jeff Thompson from the UK.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff with a G.
Yep.
So 20 probably 20 years ago, maybe a little longer, I first came in contact with some of his work, read his books, his autobiography, Watch My Back. And it's funny, he and I have a lot in common. We grew up doing traditional martial arts. We always kind of felt like, is this legitimate? We started working in the nightclub world, and then very quickly realized that it wasn't working quite the way it worked against a partner who was letting you do whatever you wanted to do.
Yep.
And I realized that I was doing more with my size and strength and athleticism than I was with the karate techniques that I learned. And then once I got into jiu-jitsu, that size and strength and athleticism wasn't helping me quite as much, against smaller, more technical opponents. So I think jiu-jitsu was a great complement for being able to control people in an environment where you're trying to remove someone who's unruly, aggressive, without hurting them, without hurting yourself and hurting anyone else. And really, there's not too many martial arts that give you the skill set to do that. I've done a lot of striking too, and I think that's very important. But in that specific capacity, whether it's security or law enforcement, you're trying to restrain and control somebody, not knock all their teeth out. So, that was my primary system, was using jiu-jitsu to get people under control, to get them out of that club. And if it failed and I was defending myself, then that's where some of the striking and other stuff might come into play.
Well, speaking of striking, you surprised me a little bit. Not surprised me per se, but maybe we hadn't covered this. But it also makes sense in your background. So you also have a background in Muay Thai?
Yeah. So when I started under the Renzo Gracie organization in Pennsylvania many years ago, the program was kind of in its infancy. The owner of the school was a purple belt. We used to go up to New York and train with Renzo and his guys, pretty regularly at that time. And then as the school grew and we expanded and we added a cage and we added a boxing ring and all the stuff you see in modern MMA gyms, the owner of the school, Rich Latta, was fighting in MMA in Strikeforce at the time.
Nice.
So we brought in Eric Utsch, who's a friend of mine, who's a former K1 Muay Thai guy. He actually works in close protection now, ironically. So we've kind of reverse paths. But he was my first Muay Thai instructor many years ago. Trained with him for a while, and then just with doing Krav and jiu-jitsu and everything else, kind of fell out of it a little bit. But recently, the gym I train at here in Virginia, when I'm in town for work, they developed a Muay Thai program about a year ago or so, and I've been a student of that program since. So it's good to get back out there and put the mitts on and put the shin pads on and work on your timing and all that kind of stuff that you don't realize how perishable it is if you're not doing it regularly.
Oh, absolutely. My background in Muay Thai was under Arjun Chai Sarasut. Of course, prior to joining the Army, I was in a Santo Academy affiliated gym. So, and kind of on the note that, Craig had a similar background.
Oh yeah.
I love, and there's no doubt some of my fellow Gibson's martial arts folks in this audience, but also, I still respect that lineage. However, to be honest, it was my exposure to jiu-jitsu, and let's just face it, it was a very, it wasn't a very strong program. I think the highest, we had one guy that was a blue belt, right? But then also the Muay Thai, so I got exposed to those two and straight up boxing.
Muay Thai and jiu-jitsu are the two things I typically recommend to people these days. I told you I have a black belt in Krav Maga, but Krav Maga has kind of gone off the rails. In the early 2000s, there was a few places that were doing some pretty legit stuff. It was fundamental striking, basic grappling, and then filling in all the gaps that existed with multiples and edge weapons and gun stuff. And a lot of places were doing it pretty well. And then it kind of went the way of a lot of the traditional martial arts, where they lost the quality control and they started, you can come to a 3-day course and get certified to be an instructor. And then so now you have a guy,
I didn't know that.
A Taekwondo guy for 20 years, and he went to a 3-day Krav Maga course, and now he's teaching Krav Maga, but really he's teaching Taekwondo and calling it Krav Maga. So I don't generally recommend Krav Maga to anybody anymore, just because I don't really know of any gyms that are doing it well. And I think for the most part, if you go and you get a decent amount of Muay Thai or kickboxing, I actually prefer Dutch kickboxing, but either or, and some jiu-jitsu, right? And wrestling if you can find it, although that's hard to find as an adult. But if you get those couple of skill sets there, you're probably ahead of 90% of the world anyway. So that's typically what I recommend a lot of our students now. And some of the ones that aren't comfortable starting with jiu-jitsu because of some of the intimacy that's involved, I say, well, go train kickboxing, right? If you can learn how to hit with all 8 of your limbs, you're going to be a handful for anybody that tries to do you harm. And you don't necessarily need a technique to get out of every single potential attack if you know how to hit somebody really hard.
Well, and Muay Thai to me is still fun. I don't train in it regularly. Frankly, one of the last times I did, well, I take that back. In the mornings when I coach at my jiu-jitsu gym, some of my guys were asking for, some striking. So we did some boxing and a little bit of Muay Thai. But speaking of Thailand, when we were talking up front, I got to go to a couple of camps over there. That was amazing.
Oh, that's awesome.
And boy, I was rusty at the time, so it didn't go as well for me in some of the sparring, but that's okay.
I've heard those camps are very physically demanding too, like the running in the morning and then sparring and then the running in the evening and sparring.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, I just went for some afternoon training sessions, or one of them was a morning, and my warm up was 3-minute rounds, which isn't that big of a deal in most senses, but you see where in Thailand they jump rope with real ropes, like huge ass ropes.
Heavy ropes. Yep, heavy ropes. Yeah,
man, I was worn the hell out.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, like we were saying pre-show, Thailand's one of the handful of places I haven't been that I would really like to go. But I think the training is going to be a kick in the ass because it's very, very physical. So I just, as we were talking before the show, I just finished a back-to-back Muay Thai class because, generally when I'm in this area in Virginia, I'll train at night. So I'll go do the Muay Thai class for like an hour, and then I'll do like an hour and a half of jiu-jitsu. But since we were going to do the show today, I decided to do the beginner and the advanced Muay Thai class back to back just to get a nice, good sweat in, and then I'll miss out on jiu-jitsu tonight.
Well, hey, we appreciate you. We don't like to hear you having to miss jiu-jitsu, but we're glad that you. I mean, that's a big deal, giving up jiu-jitsu to come on our show. So we appreciate. But the point I was going to make is you got after it before coming on. That's cool. Well, awesome. Just a quick note. So, we got kind of hooked up with Chris Fry, as suggested. We get together. What's your background with Chris?
So Chris and I have known each other for a long time. I don't know when we first met. We originally met through the internet, through Facebook or Instagram, and we would have like little conversations about this technique or that technique or this video or that video kind of thing. I think Craig Douglas hooked us up. And then when I first went to Vegas for work, I went and met with Chris, and we finally got to shake hands and have a meal. And then I ended up going back a couple times because at the time I was working a lot in Vegas, but also I attended several trainings at PFC where he's now working. So I went to like a residential security course there. I went to an executive protection course there. And so, we would hang out there. We would train. I went to Extreme Couture and we would get some rolling in there. And then I met Chad Lyman out there. We would train with Chad at PFC's headquarters and also at Extreme Couture. So I've known Chris for years, and now I'd say at this point I'm comfortable calling him a good friend. We text pretty regularly. We send each other memes and all kinds of goofy stuff on the internet all the time. But I think originally we met through Craig.
Oh, cool. And just full disclosure, we've had Chris on. I have been interacting with Chris on line for many years on TPI. That's where I had most of my interaction was on TPI or Total Protection Interactive for our audience out there, which was an amazing forum in its day. There was no bullshit on that forum.
That was a great forum. I was on that forum too. I didn't really talk a lot on there, but I would read a lot of what Craig and Paul Sharp and all those guys were we're posting. And I think a lot of that is kind of what started shifting my mind from some of the Krav Maga stuff to, more of where I'm at these days on a lot of things.
Oh, there's no question that forum shaped my direction in what I do. But again, I don't hold a candle to guys like you. It's one of those things where that forum, I think, really shaped so many people in such a profound way. Of course, it's where the ShivWorks Collective came from, and of course, Craig is a really good friend of ours. I'd like to say that as well. But the point I was going to make is, and this is Chris, I'm sure, is going to listen, and Aaron can remember this. So we went to TACCon, and Chris, he was teaching his classes. We hadn't met Chris to that point, right? And Chris is over there. It's like, hey, we'll come back over and meet him after he's not busy. Well, we didn't get to meet Chris there. So I felt so horrible and I feel so bad. And Chris, like, you should have just interrupted me. So Chris,
yeah, he's the nicest guy.
Yeah.
He's a phenomenal instructor too. I know we were talking, pre-show a little bit about Craig and how highly I hold him in regards to being kind of the epitome of a professional instructor, someone who their delivery is very, very refined and succinct. And I've learned a lot from Craig and, taking his courses, but also AI for him when he was in the Philadelphia area. But Chris is another one. He's a phenomenal instructor. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's got an incredible depth of knowledge in a lot of different martial arts and combatives and firearms related subjects. So, that was the cool thing about the TPI stuff with Chris and Craig and Paul and those guys, is that these are people who were talking about stuff, but they were actively also doing all of it. And they were continuously pursuing excellence in grappling, striking, edge weapons, impact weapons, firearms, you name it. These weren't guys that just opened up a gym and, kind of got lazy and were just teaching locals. These are guys who were actively going out and continuing that pursuit on their own.
Well, and that's why TPI, I think, was so valuable, because a lot of that discovery was happening throughout the beginning days and probably midway through, where a lot of that really heavy development was taking place. So yeah, TPI, we can't say enough about how valuable that.
And it's hard too, because you know how it is. Anytime you get guys talking about martial arts and fighting, you're going to have the side of the house that actually has some real experience and levels of training to speak intelligently on the subject. And then you're going to have the other side of the house that's like your Steven Seagals of the world who, did some kind of goofy martial art and think it's going to be a certain way, but really don't know what they're talking about. They really don't have any experience to speak from. And that happens on forums. It happens every once in a while in the Combatives Association. It happens anywhere on the internet, really, because unfortunately, as much of a blessing as the internet is, it's also a curse. And, people feel like they can come on and just say whatever they want without any repercussion.
Well, that kind of segues into a concept that I've seen you write about before. Maybe you can expound upon that. I mean, it's kind of perfect timing.
Yeah.
What's the elevator rule?
Yeah, the elevator rule is just something I kind of coined by saying, look, if I wouldn't say it to you on an elevator, I'm not going to say it to you online, right? Like, I think if more people live by that mentality, you'd have a lot less false bravado and just complete nonsense on the internet. I think if I was standing in the elevator with some of the people that have said some things to me online, I don't think they would say those things in that same way. And I know I wouldn't, because I'm just not that kind of person.
Yep.
But conversely, if I would really say it to you, if I'm going to say it to you online, I would say it to you in the elevator. So I think if you kind of think about that before you say something, like, hey, if this person was right here and we were locked in a confined space, would I really say it to them? And would I say it in the same way I'm saying it here on the internet? The world would probably be a little bit better place.
Well, it's simply about reasoned discussion, and everything that, folks talk about online that know what the hell they're talking about. It's for valid reasons. It's been filtered. It's been tested, pressure tested. You know,
Yeah, the other thing is we've lost the ability to disagree with each other
yes,
amicably,
exactly.
right? Like it's like you think this and I think that, and now we're enemies instead of just having a conversation about it. And at the end of the conversation, maybe you still think what you think, and maybe I still think what I think, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to be friends. I mean, there's some things that are a little more serious than others, but I think as a society, we've really lost the ability to disagree. Um, Without having it turn into a total shit show. And unfortunately, our country's in a sad state of affairs as a result of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes trite to say, hey, these devices, my plug coming up there, Brody. Anyway, these devices, it's trite to say, hey, these are a detriment. They are such an awesome value, but these devices allow people to sink into them, not have human interaction, and lose the ability to actually, be civilized with each other. So, yeah, I like that. I saw you wrote that. I'm like, yep, that's a good concept because
Well, I
it
forget
is.
what prompted that, but I think somebody, I saw something somewhere and I thought about it and I said, that's not how I operate. If I was going to say something to you, I would only say it to you the same way I'd say it to you in person. Right. So, but I think there's a lot of people on the internet that, come off very aggressively and they say crazy things. And I've never had any of those people say any of those things to me when they're standing next to me. I'm a reasonably big guy. I'm just about 6 foot, 265. So I mean, if you were going to say it to me in person, I would at least respect you for saying it to me in person. But if you're going to hide behind a keyboard and talk shit, that's not my style.
Well, and I think ultimately it comes down to the majority of individuals that know what the hell they're doing, that are in this walk for real, are humble people, and the people that
Oh,
are yapping the way that they do are typically people that are not in the path like folks like you, right?
yeah. The other thing I've always said is with ability comes humility, right? And I think if you're good at something, you should be humble about it. Those of us who have done jujitsu long enough to have had the shit beat out of us by smaller and weaker people repeatedly, and kept coming back for more, have, for the most part, generally had our egos beaten out of us, and we're usually fairly, human, fairly humble people, for the most part.
Yeah, I know it's kind of cliche, but I mean, the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know,
Sure.
and that in itself is humbling. I was going to say when it comes to the whole online civility thing, I'm usually pretty good about not getting into tiffs with people, but something came up about one of my guitar building friends on Facebook, and they were pulling some praise of Jimmy Carter and how great he is and was, etc., and how much he did for the working man. And I just couldn't take some of this, not about him necessarily, but I just couldn't take some of the stuff they were talking about when it came to, you know, frankly, the left working on behalf of the little guy.
Right.
That is one of the biggest myths that I mean, it is incredible. And I just went into the fact that, okay, now Jimmy Carter didn't cause inflation. Joe Biden didn't cause inflation, but I can guarantee you that government policy and government spending has increased inflation beyond what it would ever have been. That's a
Sure.
long story, but the guy came on and started arguing about me, arguing with me that I didn't know it. I surely didn't understand why prices were what they were, and I went on there and I said, "Well, I'm an accountant, and I've got a pretty deep education in economics, and I'm a CMA, and I make my living with this stuff. So I guarantee I know 10 times what you know about this stuff."
Sure.
And just went off on some some decent explanations of some actual economic concepts. And the best the guy could come back and say, "I'm glad you feel so good about yourself." You know, well, did he started out insulting me. So I said, "Okay, here are my credentials. I guarantee you I know more about economics than you do." But in the end, I wasted my time. Right.
Yep.
Well, that's how it is. I mean, politics especially are one of those hot button subjects that if you're going to talk about it on the internet, you're going to get stuff from both sides and it's going to turn into a mess. So, my general rule of thumb is if it's not a friend or somebody that I respect, I'm probably not going to talk about it at all, really. And then also, if I'm going to have a real discussion, if it's not someone I would actually seek advice from, like I respect their opinion enough to ask advice from them, then I'm not going to ask them about it because I don't really give a shit what their opinion is. Everybody thinks whatever they think. At this point, I mean, I'll just say it like how anyone can think that the current president is doing a great job and so great that you would vote for him again is beyond my comprehension. And that doesn't mean you have to support the other guy or whatever. It just means that what's going on right now is not good for any of us. And I think anybody who thinks it is has got their head buried in the sand.
Well, can't agree more. With the average cost of about 12,000, 13,000 more, and I don't know what the current number is, an additional cost to your average family, each year right now.
Yeah.
You got Ukraine being invaded by Russia. You got China encircling Taiwan. Just go down the list. The current situation on the borders. I mean, heck, just today we found out that there was another 8 terrorists arrested at the border.
I saw that some of them were in Philadelphia too.
But Tajikistan, or I may have the country wrong.
Yeah, I saw that as well. And it's kind of to go back to the combatives and stuff. I think unfortunately there's going to be some challenging times ahead of us, and I think that training in things like combatives and firearms and tactics is going to be even more relevant in the near future, sadly. But I think that's the way it's headed.
Yes, sir. I mean, and let's see. And this isn't necessarily completely relevant, but I picked up a new book by Victor Davis Hanson. It's called The End of Everything.
Oh, wow.
And it talks about some antiquity societies that completely were annihilated in war. And there's more nuance to it than that, but there's absolutely complete relations to the current direction of our republic. So more to follow on this. I might discuss this on the air, Aaron, by the way. This book so far is amazing. And Victor Davis Hanson is a brilliant mind. So,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm just writing that down. I'm gonna have to pick that up. That looks like an interesting read.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw him talk about it on one of the programs. I forget, and I went on and ordered it, and I'm about a fourth through it this week. So yeah, it's incredible.
This is an aside, but it's still somewhat germane. I want to give a shout out to our friends over at American Warrior show, Rich Brown and Mike C. Clander. Eric, they've got a couple of really good episodes. I'm only on the first one, but it's Nuclear War Part 1 and Nuclear War Part 2.
Yep.
Dude, they're talking about some fascinating stuff and some scary stuff too.
Yeah, I listened to the first one, and I'm about halfway through.
Listeners, you need to go out there and listen to those shows. Both Mike and Rich are some good friends of ours that we have met through us essentially being colleagues, not competitors, colleagues. And yeah, that one thing they were talking about, and I'll cut it short, is that there's been a handful of times where it took human intervention to stop automatic launching of nuclear weapons.
Wow, did not know that.
They explained one specific time, and I think they said it was in a matter of like 6 minutes that it was called off.
That's some scary stuff.
So maybe give that a listen. And they were talking about a lady's book on there. I can't remember her name, but everybody go out there and listen to them. They're excellent guys. And Rich Brown, man, he's a wealth of knowledge too. But so this is probably speaking of being prepared and delving into the things that we need to learn and engross ourselves in because of the possible things that we may have to deal with in the future. Adam, why don't you tell us about the Scholl Security Group? Pardon me, I keep getting scared about pronouncing your name.
Yeah, no worries. Scholl Security Group's my company. I started it probably about 10 years ago now. And the original intent was to do kind of a combination of security related functions, combatives training, firearms training, and tactical training. I ended up doing mostly just combative stuff, teaching combative stuff. At this point, like I said, because of my work with the government, I really don't do a whole lot under that umbrella. But I did have an active program where I taught self-defense and combatives at the Renzo Gracie Academy in Pennsylvania for a number of years. I do still have some courses that are built out that I could absolutely take on the road. I just haven't had the time or the inclination to put that together. But I've toyed around with the idea of doing something like Craig does, where a 2.5 or 3 day course here and there, maybe quarterly. So that might be something that you could see in the future. But as far as what's going on with the company now, not a whole lot. I mean, I still have an Instagram presence. I'll post some interesting videos. Usually it's somebody making a poor decision and paying for it, with regard to self-defense and letting their ego get a hold of them and ending up getting stabbed or cut or injured in some way. But that's about it. Right now, I'm really not doing a whole lot in the private sector, just because, like I said, I am pretty busy with the government side of the house.
Well, it certainly would be cool if you do, and if you start your open enrollment stuff up again, or next time that you are doing any of that, please let us know, and we'll have you on, and we'll try to promote that some.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Like I said, I'm going to be at the Combative Summit in September. I'm scheduled to be there at this point. I've made the arrangements to be there. So unless something crazy comes up, I'll be there. But that might get the juices flowing again and say, hey, let me start doing something when I can. I don't see it being as busy as some of the guys that are doing now, because I just quite honestly, I don't have the desire to be gone every weekend in a different city, in a different town. I'm already traveling quite a bit as it is for my full-time job. So I don't want to trade one set of traveling for another set of traveling, but it wouldn't be bad to put together those courses again and maybe do a couple a year.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it would be excellent training, and to the point, the Combative Summit, it's an amazing event. Number one, you're going to have a blast, and on that point of might get the juices flowing, the clients at the training, half the people are professionals themselves,
right,
that were there. And then also the folks that weren't professionals themselves were the epitome of serious students. So it was an amazing event.
I mean, it's really a great idea too. Like, when I remember when John started talking about it last year, I think it's a fantastic idea, and that's another reason I'm going to be there to support it, and also to meet some of the people that maybe I've had conversations with throughout social media but never met in person. The idea that you could go to one place and kind of get a sampling of all the best and most brilliant minds in the combatives and firearms space, and then say, okay, I really like this guy or that guy or their curriculum, and I'm going to figure out when they're going to be near me, and then go take their full course. I think that's a fantastic model.
Well, and I truthfully believe this, and it could be that we kind of lie inside of an echo chamber these days, Aaron. You might agree with that, because we surround ourselves with individuals that are in this same path, and or more importantly,
Eric,
our mentors. Yep, go ahead.
Can you hear Josh running off on his Harley right now? It's like, dang, it's loud.
I actually couldn't hear it.
Adam, my 18-year-old just got a Harley last week, and he just cranked it up. No muffler, just straight pipes. That thing's loud.
Sounds badass. Tell them to be careful.
Oh yeah. If Eric, you can attest to how serious he is about stuff.
Yeah,
So,
he gets on to you about speeding.
oh yeah, he doesn't like riding in the car with me because I speed.
I rode bikes for years, and then once I had kids, it just wasn't practical. Everywhere I was going, the kids were with me, or I had jujitsu bags and gis and work stuff. So I ended up getting rid of all my bikes. So I'd love to get another one someday, but right now it's just not in the cards.
Yeah, I have very, very many a time almost pulled over to the Harley shop. I mean, I probably hadn't thought about it in about, I don't know, 6 years or so, but multiple times I almost went and got one. And heck, there was a Harley shop right next to my wife and I. We used to go to this place called the Ram in Washington State. It was kind of our place. And that was when it was real difficult because I'd go over there and, we'd have dinner and a couple of adult beverages. And next thing I know is like, man, I think I'm going to go over and get a Harley. But
Yeah.
at this age, it's not in the cards anymore. It's not something that I sit there and think about all the things that I could do with that money. And just, I think about, how would I need to learn the proper writing and all that stuff. I kind of feel silly
Bro,
for saying it that way, but
it's just like firearms. You need to take some riding courses so you can truly ride safely. And I mean, I'll tell you what, I am somewhat tempted to get a Ducati Street Fighter, but then I start thinking about it and thinking, hey, that could go towards vacations and stuff with my wife. But boy, it's tempting too. That's where I'm more of a sports car kind of guy, and the Ducatis speak to me. But my son's Harley's pretty dang cool. Didn't mean to get off on that. I was like, man, is his motorcycle exploding over the air here?
Yeah, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, I didn't hear it either.
Well, Adam, I think, man, I would like to talk a little bit about your close protection, executive protection side of your business, whatever we can get to,
Sure.
minus any OPSEC.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
So my company, Scholl Security, so I worked individually and subcontracted for other larger entities. A company that I worked for directly for a number of years, Larsen and Associates, they're based out of North Carolina. They run a really good 9-day executive protection agent training course down in Miami about 4 or 5 times a year. I used to teach that course for them with the owner of the company, Joe LaSource, and a handful of others. But again, these last few years I've been pretty busy, so I haven't been able to do that. I still have a close relationship with them. We still have some projects going on together, but I'm not currently working for them. But I worked for them for a number of years. Did everything from executive protection to technical surveillance countermeasures, which is electronic bug sweeps. I managed some pretty big projects in Florida and then Puerto Rico during the hurricanes in 2017. So Hurricane Irma and then Hurricane Maria, we had like 400 people on the ground in Puerto Rico, where we had no internet, no electricity, no anything really, for a couple of months, and we were supporting a large client down there, trying to get armed security out all over the island. So I was in charge of that project on the ground. And then for the other companies that I've worked for individually as an independent contractor, we've supported the NFL, the NBA, and a couple other really big clients. So I've done the close protection for the Super Bowl for I think about 5 years now. This year was actually the first one I didn't do.
Oh wow!
So every year we fly in and spend a couple of weeks supporting both teams and the coaches and players. Anytime the NFL would travel out of the country, we would support them as well. So I've been to Mexico with the teams and worked down there as an advance agent, as a close protection agent. So I've kind of done everything in the close protection world, from actual close protection, advance agent, which is when you're basically running around figuring out all the logistics for the team, detail leader, shift leader, you name it. And then I've also done a lot of work in a surveillance and or counter surveillance capacity, depending on who the client was. So it was a good run. I enjoyed it. I still do some of it here and there, but like I said, with the government stuff keeping me busy, I've cut back pretty significantly on how much EP or CP work that I take these days.
Well, frankly, it makes me think. If you don't mind me asking, have you had any involvement with Todd Fox?
So I know Todd indirectly. It turns out that a friend of mine who used to work in Atlantic City actually works for Todd for Tour Protection and has been traveling with one of Todd's clients for many years. I have communicated with Todd through social media just because we had a lot in common between the close protection stuff, the jiu-jitsu stuff, and all that. And at one point I thought about reaching out to him as far as work was concerned, but everything that he's got going on is his guys traveling with celebrities and whatnot. I generally try not to do a lot of celebrity stuff anymore. I've done a little bit of it, and it's just not my cup of tea. As a married father of two, when you're traveling with a celebrity, your life is just not your life anymore. You really have very minimal time. Training is hard, working out is hard, seeing your family is hard. You're gone for long periods of time. So, my current job, I travel a lot as it is. So again, for me to go leave that and go back to traveling all the time with celebrities is probably not optimal. But yeah, I know Todd. I've had a few conversations with him through text message. I like a lot of what he's doing as far as training. He seems to be one of the more squared away minds in the EP field. And the other thing I like about Todd, and I've actually written articles about this for a couple different publications, is that Todd's one of the few guys that I'm aware of that's working in the executive protection field who legitimately also has the physical skill set to do something if shit hits the fan. And if you remember back in like the 80s, bodyguards, right, were originally like just guys that were kind of badasses. You'd see like Mr. T was a bodyguard, Chuck Norris, these kind of people, like martial artists were getting pulled out and being made bodyguards. And then it became more of an actual profession where they realized that, hey, you need someone that looks the part, talks the part, they're intelligent, they're doing a lot of logistics, a lot of travel support, a lot of concierge type services. And so there was a shift to hiring like college graduates and people that had higher levels of education, but they didn't necessarily have the physical skill set to be protective agents. And so the articles I wrote were basically saying that you have to have both of those things. You can't just have all the logistics and concierge services and not have any combatives training, any firearms training, any driving training or medical training. Because at the end of the day, you're being hired to protect another human being. So if you can't physically protect yourself, you really don't have any business offering services protecting other people. But you would be very surprised to learn that the majority of the executive protection world that I've worked with, a lot of them don't have very much by way of the hard skills. Maybe you'll have like former cops and things like that have a little bit of firearms training and stuff like that. But I think most of us know, and I'm a former cop, most of us know that being a former cop by itself does not automatically equate to a high level of firearms proficiency. Definitely doesn't equate to a high level of defensive tactics proficiency.
Probably least of most.
And I'm sure Todd would agree with this statement that being a cop and being in executive protection are two totally different worlds. Cops are used to telling people how it's going to be. In executive protection, a lot of times you're going in there and trying to make friendships and relationships so that you can help to facilitate a smooth transition for your client coming and going. You're asking for help. You're not demanding help. So there's a lot of differences there. But yeah, I know who Todd is. Like I said, I've had a few messages back and forth. And from what I can see, it seems like he's one of the guys that's really doing a great job.
Well, I'll just make this comment, and then I'd certainly like to move into what you're really currently focused on day job wise.
Sure.
But it is actually a little bit surprising to me, and this is because I don't have a background in EP, and nor do I desire to. But I'm surprised that it's that lacking in real physical skills. I mean, I guess I'm just ignorant of it. That's very interesting.
Well, if you think about it, and the people that will argue with me and say that the reason that there doesn't need to be the physical skills is because 99.9% of the time nothing happens, right? Nothing physical happens where whether you knew how to fight or not wasn't going to be a deal breaker. A lot of these details are unarmed. People think that all EP agents are armed. The overwhelming majority of EP details are unarmed, and that's for a
Wow.
multitude of reasons. You're talking about international travel.
Yeah.
You're talking about domestic laws. So, I was licensed to be armed in a security capacity. So not just having a CCW, but an actual security license in 5 different states. Not every state has the same process. Not every state has the same license. Not every state has a license. Most states don't have any reciprocity with each other with regards to licensing. So if you want to, in other words, if you want to work armed in California and armed in New York, you have to go through totally separate processes and have all these different licenses, and you have to maintain all those licenses.
That sounds like passing the bar exam in all the different states you
Yeah,
practice
to a certain extent. But so if you want to protect a client and you're going to be armed and you're going to be jumping all over the U.S., to do that 100% legitimately, you would have to be licensed to do security in all of those states, right?
Wow.
Now, some people are trying to get around it by hiring guys that have HR 218, so they're retired law enforcement officers or they're active law enforcement officers, and they can carry. But anybody that knows anything about HR 218, it basically just replaces a concealed weapons permit in that state. So it doesn't give you any special powers. It doesn't give you the automatic authority to supersede a state's security license. So for all these reasons, not to mention the fact that many details are international, like a lot of the work Todd does, most of the time those guys are not armed. And so if you're not armed and you have no physical skill set, right, what are you really doing as a protective agent? You're doing all your logistics and you're planning and you're trying to make sure that it never gets to that point, of course. But at the end of the day, you're there to be the last line of defense between that person and somebody potentially trying to harm them. So I'm not saying you have to be a ninja, but you have to have at least some baseline skill set and understand, some level of combatives training, whether that's jujitsu, whether that's kickboxing, or kind of all the above. So I think it's important to have both. I think people that are out there that are doing it and they're just doing the logistics and travel safety and all that stuff and support side of the house are just waiting for something bad to happen. And then, God forbid it does, it's going to be a very bad day.
They're playing the odds, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing too is it's hard to find people that have all those skills, right? Especially when you talk about what the job's going to pay. Only the top 1% of people that work in that field are really making good money. The rest of the guys are part-time guys waiting for a phone call, local support. Hey, we're coming to Philadelphia. Are you available for this week or these days? But the guys that are working full time, guys that are on Facebook and Google and YouTube and, these kinds of clients or celebrities, a good friend of mine, Anton Galasian, he owns a company called Guardian Professional Security. They're out of Miami. Anton used to be 50 Cent's bodyguard, and he got shot working for 50 Cent. And then after that, all the celebrities started reaching out to him, and he realized, like, hey, I can't be everywhere at the same time. So he created his company Guardian, and he started kind of vetting his own guys and then placing them. And if you look at the majority of celebrities these days that have protection, Todd's got quite a few of them, but Anton probably has the rest of them because, it's that small of a world, right? But Anton, one of the things that he does that I've never seen anyone else do is he typically hires guys that are already really physically fit and they have some level of training. And then he also provides them training at his gym. He brings in MMA coaches and jiu-jitsu guys. And I think he has an affiliation with American Top Team and bringing some of those guys in. So, I mean, in addition to all the softer skills that you absolutely do have to have, for work and executive protection, I'm not suggesting you don't need those. He's also making sure that if something does go south, his guys are physically capable of intervening.
Man, that's such an awesome description, man, and it makes perfect sense. And when I hear executives running that type of training for their folks, man, that kind of pumps me up. Yeah, that's the way to do
really
it.
Cool. He's one of the few people that I know that's taken it to that level. He also does a lot of event security, and event security is very different from executive protection. You're more likely to be putting hands on people in event security because you're throwing people out of the stadium or the venue. But regardless, that's how he operates his business. His guys are, they're very squared away in all the facets that they should be.
Very cool. Wish we had more chiefs of police that thought that way, but I digress.
Yeah. Ironically, there's a local chief near me who just took over a department that's a couple towns over from mine, who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he is
Awesome.
actually looking to bring on some guys, and has said specifically that having some level of jiu-jitsu training is a prerequisite in his opinion.
Rock on.
So he seems to be doing some good stuff. I've even had some conversations about possibly going back into law enforcement because of guys like him. That's about the only way I would consider it at this part in my life. But local and a good chief and someone who values training and specifically defensive tactics training.
Man, that's awesome. Cool. So speaking of your current, your focus in your day job, can we talk a little bit about what you're doing in training with some of the government agencies you work with?
Yeah, so basically right now I'm a contractor for the US government. I mostly provide training. That's my primary function. And the training is typically focused in combative self-defense, travel safety and security and awareness, and then also some firearms stuff. So helping to certify firearms instructors. So helping basically teach people how to become better instructors, people that already should know how to shoot guns, pretty well, but focusing on the teaching side of it. How do we make them better instructors? How do we make them better able to diagnose problems and fix shooters? Giving them podium time in front of the class and evaluating their presence and their deliveries and things like that. So I'm based in the Northern Virginia area with the agency that I work for, and then I travel quite a bit overseas. I've been to over a dozen countries over the last couple of years for short-term assignments where we go basically any place there's a U.S. embassy, and we'll come and provide training to U.S. personnel. So most of that training is focusing on basic self-defense skills, physical skills, as well as a few presentations that are really focused on some travel safety and security stuff. So tips and tricks to beef up security while you're traveling, things you can do before you go on your trip to prepare yourself, things you can bring to beef up your hotel security in your room and whatnot, improvised weapons, things that you can use as a weapon that are not traditional weapons that you can take through checkpoints and carry on planes and all that kind of good stuff. And then we talk also about the softer side of self-defense. So all the stuff that isn't all the punchy kicky stuff, but it's really important because it's maintaining high levels of awareness, taking steps to avoid potential problems before they become problems, how to de-escalate problems. I think de-escalation is a skill that could be a whole course, right? I mean, when I worked in the nightclub business, for every story I could tell you about getting in a fight, there's probably 100 more where we de-escalated a situation and nothing happened because we were able to talk to people. And I think that de-escalation is a skill set that a lot of people don't understand. I think it's, the pitch, the pace, the tone of your voice, the words you say, how you say them, how much eye contact, your physical body posture in relationship to the person that you're dealing with, avoiding hot button words. Like I always tell every class, how many of you are married and how many of you, when you were married, got into an argument with your significant other and said, calm down, or said, relax, right? And everybody laughs just like you did. And I said, it never works, right? It never gives you the desired results. So don't do that. Like eliminate those words from your vocabulary when you're trying to de-escalate a situation.
Nice.
So just being aware of stuff like that, right? And then also we talk about escalating. Like there is a time and a place where if I can't de-escalate, I know that this person's about to do something to me. Well, I may have to strike preemptively, right? I'm not going to sit here and receive a certain amount of physical damage before I'm allowed to defend myself. If I can articulate that certain criteria has been met, there's a time and a place for me to strike first. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much what the training is that we provide. And again, it's primarily to U.S. government personnel that are living and working overseas or preparing to live and work overseas.
Man, that sounds like important training. And man, I'm glad that folks like you are on the job. I'm curious, is there any, recent, not necessarily specific location, has there been any kind of unique situations during some of your overseas instruction that is notable?
Most of them are pretty mundane. Like I said, I've been all over South America. Down there, the big thing was when you were getting in Ubers at the time, like COVID was kind of wrapping up, and they said you got to watch out for Getting in Ubers, a lot of the Uber drivers would ask you to use their hand sanitizer when you got in the vehicle. At the time, they were lacing hand sanitizer with something called scopolamine, which is a drug that can essentially render you incapacitated. And so then they can rob you or rape you or do whatever it is they want to do to you. So the little things like that come up where we need to be aware of that. I was in Israel and we had, an incident where our driver didn't show up and we went to get a cab, and I'm pretty sure we took a cab service that we shouldn't have taken. Like, we should have taken the regular cabs, and we got kind of talked into taking a different cab. And we kind of knew it wasn't legit. It was like a hack cab situation. But the team that I was with, we felt comfortable going anyway. And I think all that ended up happening there is we ended up paying a little bit more than we should have. But we all knew we shouldn't have done it, and we did it anyway. So that just goes to show you that even people who teach this stuff can make mistakes in the heat of the moment, right? So we learn from that, and we use that as an example to our students of what not to do. I was just in Africa recently, and that place is pretty chaotic. So you have to kind of keep your head on a swivel when you're out and about. I think it's funny, some of these places you go, you have to go through a metal detector to get in your hotel, or you have to go through a metal detector to get into the mall. But the people that are monitoring the metal detector are not really paying attention. So the first day, I would take all my stuff out and put it in the basket and walk through and make sure I had no metal. And then after that, I just started putting my cell phone in there, and I would walk through with all kinds of metal, and nobody cared. And in Africa, I actually bought these 2 African war clubs, which are basically like little baseball bats with a knob on the end of them. And I bought a blade that was made by a local tribe. It was next to the mall. It was at an outdoor open air market kind of situation. And then we were going to go eat in the mall. And so the people I was with said, well, how are you going to bring that stuff in the mall? And I said, I'm going to walk right through this metal detector with it in my hand. And that's exactly what I did. I literally walked right through the metal detector with it in my hands. I looked at the lady, I said, thank you. And I just kept walking, and nobody stopped me. So a lot of these places you go, the security is security theater, as I like to say. It's posturing. It's not real security. They're just there to kind of thwart potential, kind of be a deterrent, so to speak. But if you really go up there and test them, a lot of times it doesn't work out so well.
Well, and which makes it so much more important that you do the exact same thing that you just said you do, is see what you can get through, because you never know when shit's going to kick off, and you're going to want to have some tools,
Yeah, we're a big proponent of improvised weapons. A lot of our people are not in a capacity where they're going to be carrying weapons. And so, being able to have something that they can put in their hands. I mean, if you're not going to train, 6 months or a year of kickboxing and another couple of years of jiu-jitsu, it's hard to have the physical skills that you might need, when the time comes. So one of the things that you can do that can kind of give you a little bit of a force multiplication is to have some kind of tool in your hand and be ready, willing, and able to use it. So one of the things I carry is a small handheld flashlight, something that just makes a nice fist fill. It's not a tactical light because a lot of places won't allow you to come in if you have the beveled bezel and all that kind of stuff. But just putting something in a fist and being able to smash somebody in the face with it certainly does a lot more damage than you can do with your fist by itself. Plus, it saves wear and tear on your hands. Same thing we do with pens. I'm partial to zebra pens because they're stainless steel, full body. You could buy them at any CVS or Walgreens or Rite Aid. They're not a tactical pen, so they're not obnoxious looking, and no one's going to take them from you. But the Zebra 701 is a full body, very robust and very sturdy stainless steel pen. It writes really good, which is my first prerequisite of a pen, because contrary to popular belief, I'm doing a lot more writing with pens than I am stabbing people. But I can have it with me everywhere. I carry it on planes. I carry it in courthouses, through security checkpoints. And if I put that in a fist, that could be essentially an edged weapon, right? It could allow me to poke holes in someone. So again, someone like myself with a little bit more combatives training, I don't necessarily need to have these things, but they're force multipliers. But other people that don't have the same level of training and experience with regard to personal safety and combatives would probably benefit from having something like that, and then knowing how to use it and having practiced it.
Yeah, that's awesome, because, I was just about to ask you, hey, give our audience members out there that may not have any of these thought processes just a few tips on what they can do.
Well, I'll tell you, since we're on the topic of improvised weapons, there are 4 categories of improvised weapons. You have impact weapons, which are anything that you can pick up and hit somebody with. So from a portable perspective, I got my little flashlight. Maybe I'm carrying a stainless steel water bottle, stuff like that, right? Anything I can put in my hand, I can hit somebody with. Some impact weapons are going to also offer range, like a cane or a stick or a baseball bat or a mag light or whatever, right? And some of them are going to be smaller. So that's the first big one. The second big one is edge weapons. And that's anything I can put in my hand where I can poke holes in somebody or cut them. So one of the best improvised edge weapons is screwdrivers. I can tell you how many crackheads I've gotten in a fight with working in the nightclub business in back alleyways that have tried to stab me with a screwdriver. Actually, on a couple occasions, it ended up being a screwdriver that had been sharpened. But screwdrivers, even by themselves, whether it's Phillips or flathead, are very, very sturdy, very robust. You put them in a hammer fist, you put the soft end in the pointy spots, and you lather, rinse, repeat as necessary. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how to do it. You don't have to be a Kali or a Screama or, whatever practitioner. You just have to have the willingness to do it. So edge weapons, that pen could be an edge weapon too. So those are the 2 big ones. And then after that, you have projectile weapons, which is anything you can launch, shoot, spray, throw. It could be a fire extinguisher, it could be a fistful of sand, handful of change, could be grabbing stuff off your desk and throwing it at somebody. And then you have flexible weapons. Flexible weapons are things like your lanyard, choking somebody with it, a hoodie, a shirt, wrapping it around them, taking a padlock and putting it in a sock, right? Stuff like that. Flexible weapons are a little more challenging. A lot of people, when they try to do the old padlock on the handkerchief thing, when they go to hit something with it, it bounces off of the thing and it hits them in the face. So typically we advocate for people to use impact or edge weapons just because they're much simpler.
Yeah, those are good tips. And, when you talk about the flexible weapons, it reminds me, all of us that grew up with martial arts as young people probably messed around with chucks, right?
Oh yeah, I had chucks. Yep.
How quickly we learned that, and it's funny.
There's a reason they were covered in foam when you had the first pair, because they were bouncing off of stuff and hitting other stuff, and
Yeah, it is funny thinking about that past. I remember when I was a teenager. I don't know, probably when my first year or first semester in college, I think I was carrying a pair in my car. I just think about the silliness.
I made, and this is embarrassing, I'm going to say it anyway, but I made the, if you saw the movie about Bruce Lee with his son, I forget what it was, The Dragon or whatever. He had a thing where it was like a handle to a gardening tool and then a long chain, and he had it wrapped up in his back, and he pulled it out in the movie. I made something like that when I was a kid and was playing around with it. It was like a dog chain and a garden handle or some nonsense.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
I would say probably listeners of this show have done some of that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Well, awesome, Adam. Excellent tips. I think it's important, just saying from my own perspective, because I travel overseas a lot, is a lot of that's important to think ahead, and figure out some things that can add force multipliers to your personal protection and to your.
One of the biggest things people can do if they're going to travel overseas is not, the improvised weapons is great and all that stuff, but really one of the biggest things you can do is do your research, right? So know where you're going. There's plenty of open source information out there. The State Department has a website called the Overseas Advisory Council, where they pretty much prepackage all this information for you. So crime rates, common ruses, terrorist presence, and all this kind of stuff. And basically, you just want to know where you're going, right? And then, have your basic area familiarization. So know where's my hotel in relationship to where I need to be. Are there any gangs operating in the areas, or any, what kind of crime is in the area? Sometimes you can find good stuff on Instagram and stuff like that too. And just having all that information ahead of time, so that way when you get there, you know what you're getting yourself into. I think a lot of people show up in another country, they don't know where the hotel is, they don't know where the ambulances are, or hospitals are. They don't know whether police are friendly or not. They don't know where the embassy is. They don't know if their phone's going to work there. Nowadays, most of your modern phones will work most places. And if you have an international plan, you're probably good. If not, you're either going to have to get a SIM card or an eSIM or a local phone. And, just knowing that ahead of time, like, what's my communication plan? What happens if I get there and I can't call or text anybody? Some countries, the airports are not open 24 hours. So you could show up in a country and land at the airport, miss your ride, and then next thing you know, they're kicking you out on the street because it's late at night and you're locked out of the airport in some third world country and you don't know how to get around. So really just doing your research, talking to people that may have been there before, going online and thinking about all the possible things that could go bad and having answers to those questions ahead of time.
Well, Adam, you mentioned the State Department website, and the State Department has a couple of apps that have a lot of the information.
Yep.
And we talk about, and I'll actually throw a lot of that in the show notes, because we talk about this all the time on the show. Sometimes just even seeing the information, reading it as a mental map that's already been created in your mind. So that's why when we talk about stuff like this, we really want to emphasize how important that stuff is, especially traveling overseas, because you're going to be in an unfamiliar area. And to your point, man, the first thing I'm thinking about is getting my comms situated, and knowing your embassy numbers, man, no matter where you're at, if it's a friendly country, is being able to get a hold of help. Go ahead.
Yeah, that Smart Traveler app.
Smart Travel. That's what I got on my phone. Yep.
That's a great one. Domestically, same thing, right? If you're traveling domestically, same thing. I just want to do some research, know the area. Once I get there, I want to establish a baseline. I want to know what's normal and what's not normal so that I can see deviations. What's normal in Chicago is not what's normal in Topeka, Kansas, right? So just by being in one or the other, I have to understand what normal looks like so I can understand what abnormal looks like.
Baseline,
having those numbers, having that comms plan. I always bring paper copies of important numbers too. Usually what I'll do is I'll type them up on paper and I'll shrink them down in like super small font, and then I'll conceal them in different things like, maybe in a wallet or in a drop wallet or a concealment device or passport case or whatever, just so I have multiple copies of emergency numbers in case my phone dies. We are so married to these things. Mm-hmm. And if this thing falls in the toilet or it drops and it breaks or just flat out doesn't work anymore, everything that we have and that we need is usually on this. And that's a big problem. So we want to make sure that we have some redundancy there, whether we're traveling domestically or internationally.
Excellent tips. And this really turned into an awesome area of discussion, because this is stuff that folks need to hear. And, it's funny, the Smart Traveler app, I think folks can possibly see this here. So, you open up the Smart Traveler app and it's got all the essential, essentially every country you could travel to, and you select the country, and I almost just put Azerbaijan, just because that was in my site. Exercise increased caution, embassies and consulates, safety and security. Anyway, I won't go too in depth in that, but yes, folks out there, get that app put on your phone, because it has some excellent information on there. It's difficult for me to sometimes push government apps, but you know what? That's a good one.
I can understand, believe me.
Well, awesome, man. I love this discussion, and I'm sure that our audience will appreciate it as well. Anything else you want to add to that, Adam?
No, I mean, that's it as far as the travel is concerned. Like I said, I've been to a lot of different places, and really just doing your homework and then having some street smarts, keeping your head on a swivel, making sure that you're paying attention, not burying your face in your phone. And unfortunately, that's one of those things that just everybody does, right? But, like to the extent that when I worked in the close protection world, I remember working on a low profile detail one time in the Northern California area. And, we were protecting a client, and I was working with a female partner, and we went into a coffee shop. And we were basically just in there as kind of an advanced team, just being in there for when the client came in there. And every single person in the coffee shop was either on their phone or on their computer. And so we actually stood out because we weren't. So we actually had to intentionally take our phones out and pretend like we were on our phones just so we could blend in with everyone else, right? But that's just the way things are now. So yeah, I would say, traveling, anytime you're traveling, and it doesn't have to be internationally. I mean, all these things still apply domestically. If you're going to go to any major U.S. city, or really anywhere for that matter, you should have that phone in your pocket. You should not be distracted by that, having your earbuds in and all that stuff. You're just taking away senses that help give you indication that there's a problem. And so that's probably not wise.
Excellent tips. Well, I think moving into a couple of fun subjects, let's talk just a little bit about jiu-jitsu, sure. And then I'll hand it over to Aaron for one of his favorite questions. Okay. We talked offline or pre-show about some cool stuff you have coming in jiu-jitsu. Don't you have some a new person coming into your gym, possibly a seminar coming up? Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I thought that was cool.
Yeah, so I train and teach at the Renzo Gracie Academy in Pennsylvania, but I'm in Northern Virginia a lot of time for work. And so when I'm down here, I train at a place called Battlefield Jiu-Jitsu in Haymarket. It's a great school. Jason Doucette is the owner. Him and his wife are great people, and they have a phenomenal program there. They have a great kids program. They have a great Muay Thai program, great Jiu-Jitsu program, and then they've got some judo and some wrestling. So, I mean, they're killing it on all fronts. When I was in Brazil, I made friends with a guy named Pedro Maia, and Pedro just won Worlds in Brazil. Yeah. He's a very talented grappler. He's a young guy. I think he's 23 or 24 now. Grew up in the favelas down there and has been doing jiu-jitsu his entire life. And so now he's got a school down there, obviously competes at a very high level. So we've brought Pedro to the U.S. a couple of times to do some seminars. And he's actually going to be coming back to Battlefield, I believe the 28th of this month. So he's going to be doing a seminar in Northern Virginia, in Haymarket, Virginia, at Battlefield BJJ. So if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to those guys over at Battlefield. I think he's actually also going to teach class for a couple days, because Pedro's just one of those guys where he was like, "Hey, I'll come teach class for the whole week," and we were like, "Okay," So awesome. It ended up being, I think he's going to teach class for like 2 days, and then he's going to do an actual seminar. And I can tell you that, having been a student in some of his classes when I was in Brazil, he puts on a really good class. In Brazil, it's a very physical class because down there everything is competition oriented. So it was a pretty physically demanding class. But up here, he usually caters it more to the audience, and he just has a really unique way of teaching. Rather than your traditional jiu-jitsu, like, hey, we're going to teach 2 or 3 moves tonight, then we're going to practice those moves, and then we're going to roll. He teaches more from like a conceptual perspective. So the last time he was here, I think he did something from, let's say, bottom side control. And he was really just talking about, okay, what I want you to do is just move and feel the space. Like, just feel any little bit of space that you can find and just move, right? And people were kind of just playing around with some concepts. And I think a lot of people got a lot of good things out of it.
Man, that's awesome. Sometimes, sometimes the concepts are more important than specific techniques.
I'm a huge concept and principle guy. When it comes to teaching combatives and self-defense specifically, I focus mostly on concepts and less on techniques. Even in jiu-jitsu now, I've started to teach jiu-jitsu a little bit differently. I start to kind of play around with some different ideas. I have students play some games where they're trying to do something very deliberately. Like, for example, if I'm in your guard, we're going to do a 2-minute positional round. Instead of just, me trying to win, you trying to win, I'm only trying to pass, and you're only trying to prevent me from passing. So you're not sweeping, you're not submitting, you're not doing all the other things. So you're really just isolating very specific elements of your game. And I think when you're forced to isolate certain things, it really forces you to kind of get outside of your comfort zone. So if we were to do the same drill, but I said, the only thing you're allowed to do is try to submit me. Well, now you're working through all your options to submit me from a closed guard. right? And so you probably have a couple that you would use regularly if you're in that position, but you're also going to, once those fail, you're going to be like, okay, well, what else can I do?
Mhm.
And you might, remember something that you haven't used in a long time, and then you bring that back into your little repertoire. So I think principles and concepts are definitely very important when you're talking about learning self-defense and combatives, especially self-defense and combatives, because if you just train, you come into class and how do I get out of this grab? How do I get out of that grab? How do I do this? How do I do that? That's a lot of information, and you're not going to remember all those techniques. I always tell people, like, if you're grabbed in any way and you can hit the person, start there, right? Like that's a pretty easy response that you can remember almost always. Whatever targets are available, hit them.
Yeah, it's good. And I have to admit that I really wish that most folks understood how important that type of positional drilling or sparring, really is, because there's so much more you get out of that. I'm not saying that you don't get more out of that out of regular free rolling, but if you're doing that a high percentage of the time, and then you move into your standard free rolling, man, just the amount of expansion that you have from that type of drilling and or sparring is paramount.
I'll give you a great example of that. I did a ton of positional drilling at the level of blue belt. And at the time, I was probably like on the verge of purple belt, and I was tapping out purple belts and tapping out a couple brown belts, doing a lot of positional training. Then I left jiu-jitsu for a few years, and then I eventually came back, made it all the way up to brown belt. At the time, I was a brown belt, but at that time, I wasn't doing any positional training. And when I would roll with people, I could typically get top position because I'm a bigger guy. I could keep them there, and then I could submit them. And eventually, I got hurt. And when I got hurt, I tore some ligaments in my knee, and I couldn't start from the kneeling position. So I ended up having to sit on my butt for about 8 months. So that gave people an advantage to get on top of me. Very quickly, I realized that my bottom game was not good. It was nowhere near where it should have been at that level. So it forced me to recognize that that's where I need to do the work. And that's exactly what positional drilling does. And that's why I tell people, at least once a week, you should be going through all the positions and drilling, because you can kind of use it as a self-inventory and say, okay, I did really good on top side control. I did pretty good on mount. My bottom side half guard sucks. My bottom side control sucks, right? And if you were to give yourself a letter grade, whichever ones are the lowest are the ones you probably need to spend some time on.
Nice. Excellent tip, man.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Man, that's folks should be getting a lot out of those. Again, mental
Amen.
cues. We say all the time in this show, mental cues that we all need to be thinking about. Awesome. Well, Aaron, what you got, brother?
Well, this brings us to the most important question of the show. And that is, as many of our listeners know, what are your top 3 favorite musical artists and or bands?
Okay. I knew you were going to ask this, so I should be more well prepared. I honestly, I don't listen to a ton of music anymore because I listen to a ton of podcasts. When I'm driving, I'm always listening.
Well, we're sad to hear that.
But you guys are one of the podcasts. But
Awesome.
music wise, right now I'm really into country music. So I like Jackson Dean, Luke Combs, and Morgan Wallen are probably my top 3 in no particular order. And then when I'm trying to mix it up and maybe hitting the heavy bag or something, you can't go wrong with Five Finger Death Punch. So.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Awesome. We don't get a lot of answers with country, so that's refreshing.
Well, it's funny because I'm from the Philadelphia area.
Yeah.
I never was into country music whatsoever. But when I worked in the city in law enforcement, by the time the day was over, the night was over, because I worked at night for the most part, you're just so stressed out, and you've absolutely had it. So some days I would drive home with the radio off, no podcast, no anything.
Mm-hmm. And
then one day I was driving and somehow country music came on, and I just kind of found it kind of relaxing. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. It wasn't anything too aggressive. It wasn't anything that, gave me any kind of like remembrance of the nightclub stuff and all the shit I've been through in that world. And I just slowly started taking a liking to it, and now my wife and I are big country music fans. We've been to a couple different concerts, and, there's some other people we'd like to see.
That,
Well, go ahead,
that's
Aaron. I'm sorry.
That's a real cool answer, and I think it's interesting what even just specifically in music, how our state of mind when it comes to what we're busy with can get us into a different world of music.
Mhm.
See, I'm a rock guitar player through and through, but I went through a stage in life where I got really tired of rock music, and all I listened to was stuff like Sarah McLachlan and Sheryl Crow, and if there was a beautiful female voice and a piano, I was into it. And that was really the main thing, was that when I would go home from long, I was maybe playing a gig 3 hours away and had to drive at night. It was really relaxing to listen to that music compared to what I normally did.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, now I don't know if it's funny, some people don't count him as, quote, real country, but I'm not that much of a country fan, even though, Eric and I grew up here in what would be considered pretty country territory, which is Oklahoma.
Mhm.
But Brad Paisley is by far one of my favorite musicians.
Yeah, I like him too. And it's funny, like the old school country people will say, well, this is country and this isn't country. I don't really give a shit. But the guys that I listed, they're like a newer school country or whatever.
Mhm.
But whatever they're doing, I like it. So,
Cool.
like I said, for me, music is it's kind of like a state of mind thing, right? Where if I'm trying to just chill out, I just want to listen to something that's easy and enjoyable, and it's not going to get me all pumped up or stressed out. If I'm working out, I'm lifting heavy weights or I'm hitting a bag, I might throw on something more aggressive because I want that, right?
Mhm.
When we're training Muay Thai, the instructor will play all kinds of different stuff, and some of it'll get you going. But like, some of the hip hop stuff and that kind of stuff, I worked in so many nightclubs that played a lot of hip hop, some really aggressive house music and stuff like that. Some of that stuff actually kind of stresses me out a little bit because I almost feel like I'm back in that environment where I'm about to have to do something.
Mm.
And there's just nothing about that I enjoy at this stage of my life. So for me, I'm not into that anymore.
Well, Adam, you said something I keyed in on, Five Finger Death Punch. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I have this correct. The singer's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, I believe, right?
Yeah, he is. So he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I think Todd Fox actually trained him. I'm pretty sure Todd used to work with them. And the guy who used to be their head of security might still be their head of security. His name is Yuko or Jocko. He's a Hawaiian guy. I actually have a friend of mine that went to school with him in Hawaii. He's a Combatives black belt, I'm pretty sure, and he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He trains with Tim Kennedy, and he works for Tim Kennedy at Sheepdog Response down in Texas.
I believe he was at the Combatives
He
Summit.
probably was. He's got long hair and a big beard. Yeah.
Yep.
I forget how to say his name. It's kind of a strange name, but I don't know him personally. I just, we have a lot of mutual acquaintances. And I think he was their head of security at one point. And then I actually used to work for a band called Hell Yeah. And that band is friendly with those guys. And so, Chris Kell came to see those guys, and I got to meet him in person when I was on their security detail, just, bringing him backstage and whatnot.
Cool.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, it's a small world, man. It's funny how small the world is, right? Like when I was younger in law enforcement, I remember watching Craig Douglas videos and being like, "Oh man, this guy's really good." And then here I am now, like I text Craig here and there and we talk, right? It's like that's how small the world is. Same thing with Chris Fry. Same thing with Matt Larsen and John Valentine. And like I think I was telling you guys beforehand, recently I've been talking a lot with Kelly McCann. I'm looking forward to meeting him in person. He's actually like an hour from where I'm at right now. And a buddy of mine has a gym in the same town that he does, and they're friends. So I've been telling him I'm going to get down there to train at my buddy's gym and then train at his gym. And Kelly's got a bar in his gym, so I keep telling him we got to have some bourbon at the gym.
Yeah, I absolutely will be. And if Kelly's listening, I know he listens to our show as well. I'm definitely making it to his gym too. Man, maybe we can hook up sometime when you're
sure. Let me know, because he's a guy that, I remember being in my early 20s and watching his Inside the Crucible, reading his books when he was Jim Grover, and watching him be like one of the first people ever to put a red dot on a pistol. You know what I mean? And just because I was always into the practical side of things. That's why I did Krav Maga when I did Krav Maga, because at the time that's what it was advertised as, and that's kind of what it was really. I got into jiu-jitsu because of the fighting aspect. I didn't have a desire to compete. I've competed over the years, but like just for fun. I always just wanted to be a tougher person, right? I wanted to be able to have the skill set transfer to working in nightclubs, working in law enforcement, working in close protection. And it's actually one of the reasons why, I'm kind of unhappy with the state of affairs with jiu-jitsu right now, because I feel like a lot of it is starting to revert back to strictly competition oriented. And
it is. I can't agree more, buddy.
They're just not thinking about, when I teach class, like even if I'm teaching a straight up gi class and I'm in a half guard position or whatever, I'll say, hey, I'm monitoring this limb because he could punch me in the face here, or he could access a weapon, right? I want to know where his hands are. And some students are like, why do I care about that? Like, I just want to know about how to do this submission or this sweep or whatever. I'm like, you should care about that, because that makes your jiu-jitsu practical, so that if you leave here and you get in a fight on the street, all the time you spend in here isn't wasted because of something as stupid as you not even thinking about the possibility of this person punching you in the face when you're on the ground, which is, by the way, exactly what they're going to do, right? That's what most people are going to do that don't know.
Even with zero experience.
100%. And I used to train with a couple of guys that were training partners of mine. And I remember one of them was a black belt as well. And the very first time we trained in the ring with MMA gloves on, I would like just, touch him. I wasn't really like hitting him hard. And I used to joke around and say each time I touched him, he lost a belt rank. Like he would go like brown belt, purple belt, blue belt. And I'm like, dude, you're a phenomenal jiu-jitsu guy. And this isn't that much different. You just have to understand that you need to stop this from happening, right? Like you can't just let me punch you in the face while I'm on top of you. You have to know what my arms are doing. You have to know where my hands are. And if it was a real fight, what if I'm reaching into my gi to pull out, or my waistband to pull out a blade, right? You want to know what that hand is doing.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, brother, I think we're getting close to the end of the show, man. This has been a delight. And we say this quite often, that when we find guys that we just really enjoy talking with, and we got so much that we still have yet to talk about, that we got to have you back on again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, actually, it's funny. I was thinking about that before we got started, and I'm one of those people that's lived like so many different lives that you could almost break them down into sections. It's like, I could do a whole podcast on the nightclub years, if the statute of limitations on some of the shit I've done is up. Podcast on my law enforcement career, my government stuff, my private stuff, the EP stuff, just jiu-jitsu, just combatives, right? So, I mean, there's so many things that are going on there. So it's very difficult to get it all in one episode, but no, I appreciate you guys having me, and I'd absolutely be honored to come back on in the future.
We'll make it happen. And absolutely, I really look forward to going up to Kelly's gym soon. And man,
let me know, text me, because if I'm down here, I'll meet you there for sure.
And awesome. Keep me apprised too, bro. I would love to do that too.
Cool. So. Well, awesome. Well, listen, Adam, it's been a pleasure. I'm so glad we finally worked this out. Awesome content. Really enjoyed the conversation. Aaron and I get so much out of these conversations. So
better believe it.
It's incredible to have, the folks that we have.
Too. Thank you.
Awesome. You have a good evening, brother.
You too.
Hope to meet sometime.
Soon.
Very soon.
Good evening, guys.